Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Sorry, we're starting a few minutes late. The only item for a change in the schedule is item 3 under finance. We may move that further down in the agenda based on the flow of the meeting, so I'll just ask for some latitude on that. And with that, I will turn things over to the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gurl. Present. Mrs. Gorel. Present. Mr. Hoffman. Present. Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. McDonald.
Present.
Mr. Neighbors.
Here.
Mrs. Red.
Present.
Mr. Salgado. Mr. Schultz.
Here.
Mr. Tassoni.
Present.
Mr. Webster.
Here.
Mr. Westcott.
Present.
Mr. Arena.
Here.
Mr. Billich.
Here.
Mr. Booker.
Present.
Mr. Boomer. Mr. Butita.
Here.
Mrs. Crosby. Mr. Fellers.
Here.
Mr. Fiducia. 1 absent, 19 present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Clerk Amau. With that, I will ask everybody to stand. I'll turn things over to Mr. Butita for the invocation and pledge. Mr. Butita.
Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. We gather together with the intent of doing good work, and we seek to represent fairly and well those who have given us this task. May our efforts tonight be blessed with your insight and guided by your understanding and compassion for our fellow man. Please, God, we ask you to watch over all those who defend our freedom and our public safety, shield them from harm, and guide them in all their pursuits. We also ask the same for all public employees of Winnebago County who serve us so well. As your trusted servants, we seek your blessings on our deliberations and on our efforts here tonight. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Butita. Our next item of business under presentations, I'm going to ask Michael Dunn Jr. and Eric Sutter to come up, R1 Planning Council, to talk on the trustee program. Mr. Dunn.
Good evening. Good to be back again. Thanks for having me. Happy we've presented this information multiple times, and for the sake of clarity, as we've gone through a number of revisions of IGA up for your consideration tonight, I believe the chairman just wanted us available to answer any questions, especially questions resulting from changes of IGA language, and to again take any questions regarding the complexity of this entire program. And for that, I'm willing to take.
I'll start with the first question. There was a question raised at caucus the other night after the operations committee, a question related to the financial side. So when a property is transacted, making sure that there's financial accountability. Can you explain the relationship with the treasurer's office, your organization, and how that'll be, and to what degree that'll be an open, transparent process, and how the public would know?
So as a government entity acting as your agent, everything is subject to FOIA, Open Meetings Act. We are governed by elected leaders. We are all government employees. As your real estate agent, we do not make a decision for the county. We simply operate the sales and property management functions of the program, and we do not draw a check for covering program cost without the treasurer's additional signature, and vice versa. The funds in the program are self-contained to the program. They're not county funds. They're not RPC funds. They are program funds. And we will have meticulous record keeping as far as what redemption interest is coming into the program, how sales are being made, at what tax code are sales being made, what the proceeds from those sales are, and reporting back to the treasurer on our activity. And I believe that in discussing this with some of you, that there's an intent that county personnel brief you at a regular interval on the progress of the program. Again, you are our client, and we're approaching this program separately from some of the multi-jurisdictional programs we run. This is a program between the county and us, and we take a client-driven approach, and we will answer any questions the county has at any time during our relationship, as well as attend any meeting you ask us to attend to give updates.
The one comment, just as a follow-up to that, and then if anybody has any questions, the one specific comment, and I think it's a confusing term when used without any context. When are monies commingled? When are monies not commingled? I know that's just a question that has arisen by board members, and I just wanted to put that out there.
So in the IGA, there's a reference to a program proceeds account. That program proceeds account is a county account that is opened separate from any other county account that has signature authority both by us as your agent and the treasurer. There is no commingling of funds between the Regional Planning Council and that account. There's no commingling of funds between that account and other county accounts. And there's no commingling of funds between the land bank operation and that account. Parcels that are owned by the land bank are not commingled with the ownership apparatus around the trustee program. So the only commingling that would ascribe to that to a function is that in the past, your agent, which was Ballinger in Decatur, kept 100% of interest payments made on tax redemptions. The interest paid by somebody redeeming their taxes was not moved forward to the county or to taxing districts. It was kept by the agent. In this case, in our plan and what's in front of you tonight on the IGA, interest from redemptions is put into the program proceeds account with the proceeds from sales. So if there's any situation where funds are combined, it is that. It is that interest is now kept here locally and kept here to run the program, and then at the end of the day be split out and paid to the taxing bodies. So interest on redemptions, and only interest on redemptions, not the actual redemption. The actual redemption, as it always has been, goes back to the taxing bodies that are due it. But the interest payment now is put into the program account as sales dollars are to cover the cost of the program and then be paid to the taxing districts. That is a change from the past, and that is the only commingling of funds.
Any follow-ups just on the financial piece? One other question I've heard raised, and it's come up multiple times. There's been multiple, I think, productive discussions offline and in committee and in caucus, and even in the board the last time we talked about this, related to any terminology around highest responsible buyer. Could you just high level that in terms of how that was approached in this?
Sure. So one of the concepts on the onset of asking for our involvement that the city of Rockford and other cities and villages in Winnebago County asked for us to come in with our opinion. There were a few criteria. One is trying to keep any money raised by this program here local and to the benefit of the beneficiaries of this trust, the taxing districts. The second concept that was originally introduced was from the municipalities, more than one, a number of municipalities, and that was to either qualify or have a responsible buyer provision, so that property at a one-time-a-year auction, where most people don't even know the auction's occurring, and you really have to be at that auction to take advantage of the situation. Under that guise, sometimes properties only received one bid, or sometimes properties received multiple bids, and the second bidder was maybe $50 off or $100 off, and in that municipality's mind, the second bidder had more long-term value for that community, both as an owner and as a taxpayer, and for maybe a community or economic development reason. So the concept introduced early on that was put in front of us to try to figure out is, how do you run this program in a modern, innovative way? How do you look at how other counties, other states even, run their programs? Illinois treats tax redemptions and things like that much differently than other states. How do you try to bring innovation to this and understand that required or qualified buyer process is to the benefit of the community, to the neighbors of these parcels, to economic development, to all these factions, especially when the margin between the bids is very small. We had to balance that with the need to prove to all of you and to all the other taxing districts that the most amount of money to recoup taxes owed is being considered and is being satisfied. The state legal opinion that we received from the state of Illinois attorney who advises us is that the state statute is gray and that there's attempts to clarify that state statute moving forward. However, that the state of Illinois attorney's interpretation of that statute in their counsel to us is that once the property is in the program, you can donate it. You can give it away. You can do whatever you want with that property. It doesn't necessarily have to go to the highest bid. So taking the legal counsel that we did from the state of Illinois and working towards trying to make sure we have a mechanism to satisfy municipalities in making sure these properties do not fall into maybe a secondary or tertiary desired hand of ownership, we came up with the idea that we would have a due diligence process when bids are collected. And when one first bid comes in, that doesn't mean that the transaction's complete. It means we notify everybody through public notice that a bid has come in on a property, and you have a period of time to create backup bids and to generate additional sales, to generate additional interest and additional activity. And that when that closeout period occurs and we've collected all the bids, that we would then do due diligence on the buyers, their financial wherewithal, and a number of criteria, and then we would allow the municipality or the village to also look at it and give feedback. And the final IGA language that we have is in the event that there is more than one bid, and we, as your real estate agent, are recommending not going with the top bid, that we will provide you that due diligence report, we will provide you that feedback from that municipality, and we will explain to all of you as a county board why we are making the decision that we are only advisory. And then we give you as a county board the option to go along with that or reject it, and we'll reset and we'll put it out to bid again. And so that was a lot of back and forth, a lot of conversations, but that was where, and I'm happy with where it ended up. That is where we landed as a way to satisfy competing issues. And the legal sign-off that we got on our end was that that was an appropriate way to handle it.
I see Mr. Webster has a question. Since you hit on a change, there were a couple of changes that at the operations committee, I know that Mr. McDonald mentioned there was going to be a discussion on one small item. Can you mention any changes between that committee meeting as discussed and this evening, just so we're clear on any minor changes there?
So the IGA approved at committee, and I let Chairman McDonald speak for it, but in my answer to you, Chairman, is that we had an IGA approved at committee Monday night. That was an IGA that had been pretty much static for a few weeks. There were language considerations that I think needed to be looked at just to clarify intent and to make sure there's no confusion. None of us want to revisit IGAs. It takes a long time, and it gets in the way of the progress on behalf of our taxpayers. And so we worked with a few of the committee members to make sure that language clarifications could be proposed tonight. And one of them is simply referring to a revolving account and being consistent and referring to it as a program proceeds account. One was removing, again, there was confusion with language in the former Ballinger contract, which we tried to honor and emulate, and that confusion created different interpretations of this $15,000 number. I think upon further discussion, we were able to clarify that and take a cap that was on the old IGA out to say that whatever the true costs are incurred by the treasurer are reimbursed for those expenses. And then we, as I just answered in my last answer on responsible qualified buyer, we were able to put the provision in there that allows, in a case of multiple bids, that the county board has to approve the sale. Those are the changes that come to my mind as what has changed from Monday night till now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Dunn. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, I do want to thank Mr. Arena for taking such a interesting lead role in this. and Mr. Emmert. I know the two of them have spent hours together working on this. You mentioned that the treasurer's role in this. The treasurer has met with you on.
So we've attended many meetings. Some meetings had the treasurer in it. We never controlled the attendance of the meetings. So we were always invited to the meetings. We never organized the meetings. The meetings that we attended often did not have the treasurer in it. There are 2 meetings from my recollection, where the treasurer was present.
So the treasurer and her staff are fully apprised of this whole thing?
I can't answer that question, Mr. Webster. What we do is we communicate with the proper channel at the county, and so the communications that I've had have been with the committee chair, Mr. Arena, who was presented to us as a leader on this issue, with Steve Chapman, and with Chairman Haney. So we've communicated with those 4 individuals. I can't describe how we can communicate with the entire county. We depend on the people we talk to at the county to communicate within the county.
I could jump in just to answer your question. The most recent IGA was shared with the treasurer and I believe with the county clerk's office by Mr. Chapman with the directive that if there was any follow-ups to please let us know.
That was going to be my next question, because I think it's important to have our departments included on such a heady issue. And I was going to ask, is the clerk fully aware, abreast of the situation here and everything going on? Because I would assume there's some duties for the clerk in this as well.
There's a reimbursement to the clerk for expenses that we outline as a Ballinger contract has. It takes a number of people to make this program a success. Attorneys, clerks, treasurers, recorders. It is not on us to communicate with everybody at the county. We have to rely on the leaders that you've asked us to work with to communicate within the county, and that's what we've done, and we've done it for over a year. Mm-hmm. It would be inappropriate for me to call board members directly or department heads directly around the people that were told to us to work with in negotiating this.
Well, I still think it'd be important to keep them in the loop. Finally, I want to ask you a question here too. From what I understand, this other group or company, whatever, this Myers, has 95% of these things statewide.
Yes.
95% of the county. And so that makes me wonder if this group is doing this for 95% of the other counties that are doing something that we're trying here. I mean, I guess I wonder why perhaps we didn't fall in line with them, and how do we compare? Why would we take a different route, and how do we compare with that outfit?
I'll take that first and then Mr. Dunn. We don't compare very well. Will County has a trustee program. They have 1 property in their trustee program, and as of last check, Winnebago County has 650 properties in their trustee program. We are, unfortunately, with twice the amount of blighted properties as a Pierre County and Peoria, we have a problem that is not in line with 95% of counties, of the 102 counties in the state of Illinois. The former chairman in his administration and the current administration looked multiple times at other options. There are very few other than the status quo Ballinger option. Myers is one, it's a respected company. The outstanding part of this local solution to a very local problem from a quantity standpoint is we're keeping dollars here and we're going to plow it into the maintenance of existing properties, which will give relief to multiple partners, including the city of Rockford, including the city of South Beloit. It's also going to set aside, instead of a profit motive for a for-profit company, we'll have a few dollars to plow into our land bank, which will allow us to take additional steps forward with blight reduction and neighborhood revitalization. So we struggled. We knew we had a problem. We struggled to find a solution. We brought some good partners together, and I think we have a solution that fits the needs of Winnebago County. I think you raised a very good point, though, Mr. Webster. That's a respectable company, and it's been looked at multiple times over the last 5 or 6 years. Mr. Dunn.
I think that was a question for Mr. Dunn, actually, Chairman, and I have a follow-up question for Mr. Dunn. How,
Mr. Webster, would you like my answer to your question? I can give you my opinion. You are my client. I
he
will always
just-
be
are you
transparent.
going to tell me the same thing he just told me?
No, sir. No, sir, I won't.
Okay.
And
ahead.
so, you know, you are all my client. And so I owe you my professional opinion. And how you base your decision on my professional decision is your right as an elected member representing our taxpayers. I can't answer your question on treasurer and clerk because I do not interfere with the inner workings of how everybody at the county communicates. I can tell you when I sat in a meeting with the treasurer and when I did not. On Meyer, yes, they have many counties of the state, but Meyer was more expensive and would be more expensive than Ballinger. And one of the concerns going into this was too much money was being spent on Ballinger. Myers is a great option when you don't have many properties in your program. But when you have the density, especially in some of the neighborhoods in our community of this problem, you cannot, in my opinion, use a third party out of town private sector company with government resources to solve your problem. A multi-jurisdictional organization that is government and answerable to you and the mayors, that does not need to take a profit, and their employees live here and they drive through these neighborhoods every day because they have to plan for it already, and they're intimately familiar with our issues here, and they're not taking a profit. We are not asking for an operational cost to our role here. We're doing it for free. That to me is a far superior option than Meyer, but it's up to this board to determine who you want to go with. And I have tried to, again, compromise and find ways that since you're the client, we can fix language and fix intent and clarify intent to get to something that you all want to see happen. Because how awful it is to be a real estate agent to an owner that does not want you as a real estate agent.
Yep.
Right? And so we have done all we can to provide the community and the county a solution to the scale of magnitude of properties in this program compared to the other 95 counties.
Yeah, thank you. And what I was asking there was how, in comparison to the way that this program is laid out, how is that, are there any similarities or whatever to the way that Myers works? I mean,
I can't speak intimately towards that, as I only know the bare bones basics of how Myers approach. Myers is a phenomenal company. I don't have one. I have comments on your past agent. When we work in Boone and Stevenson County, as we do, and the land bank is Boone and Stevenson County, they use Meyer, and they're happy. We have municipal attorneys in Winnebago who did not feel that they received any sort of efficiency or quality of care from your former agent. But when they go and work in Boone and Stevenson, they feel Joseph Meyer works just fine. I don't think it's an issue of Joseph Meyer doing something different than we are, or we doing something different than them. I think a big function of it is cost. And we're offering you a way to have more of tax money go back to all these governments here locally that are struggling with their budget. And I think we are going to give a custom solution and a more in-depth solution than a company that has to manage 95 counties. And so I'm proud of what we've put together. It's been a lot of hard work, and it's been a lot of back and forth. We have learned lessons from Cook County. We have learned lessons from Sangamon County. We will continue learning lessons, and if there are lessons to be learned from Joseph Meyer, we will probably rip them off and employ them here.
thank you. That's basically what I wanted to hear was, are all these other counties satisfied with it? And it struck me that they probably were. They wouldn't have 95% involvement there. I wasn't really concerned with the number of properties, whatever, that are in fault, whether it's our county or any other county. I want to know the result, the end result.
Sure.
That's what you're speaking to me now about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Any other questions? Mr. Arena?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank Mr. Dunn and Chairman Haney for continuing to work with me throughout this week to resolve the outstanding issues I had. I do support the amended version that we'll be considering tonight. I think we came up with a good solution, so I appreciate all the work that you did. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arena, and you definitely added a lot of value, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Anything else, Mr. Dunn?
No, I'm here for you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. And with that, we'll move on
Have a
to
great night.
our next item. We have public comment. Our first speaker, Mayor Tom McNamara of the City of Rockford.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I just want to say a sincere thank you to this board. The amount of time that you've put into this issue is impressive. I really think this is a major issue facing our community. Overall, what I'm talking about is blight. I think this trustee program affects blighted properties, which affect our property values, which ultimately affect the quality of life of all of our residents. I'm here obviously to urge you again to support the R1 proposal. Obviously, the previous program's agent was based out of Decatur. I believe that this program allows us to utilize the expertise that we have in our community to keep our dollars here locally and to reinvest those dollars into beautifying and stabilizing our very own neighborhoods. Secondly, I believe that with the work of the R1 proposal, it allows our properties to get back on the tax rolls far quicker. The previous agent did one, potentially on a good year, 2 auctions. They would utilize a dynamic process and utilize that crazy thing called the internet and have sales 24/7, 365, and allow these properties to get back on the tax rolls, what we all want, far quicker. Third item is, and this is important to me, is while you still maintain control, we're also allowed and have the opportunity in cases that are needed to vet those buyers. I think we have a number of problem property owners throughout the county. That percentage is very few, but if we can not have those problem property owners continue to garner more and more properties, that's better for all of us. It's better for the quality of life of our residents. Lastly, very selfishly at the City of Rockford, this helps reduce the burden that's placed on all municipalities currently today for the maintenance of these properties. And so the very last thing I'll say, and just summing it up, is I really think overall this is better screening of buyers. It's getting these properties quicker on the tax rolls. It's helping improve the quality of life. And I just can't thank you enough for spending the time that you have on this process, because it's really important to all of the municipalities. And I appreciate all of your time and leadership on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor McNamara. Our next speaker is Mayor Ted Rail, Mayor of South Beloit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Chairman. This is so awesome. I'm never this tall, ever. So it's really kind of a cool opportunity. You know, when I first became superintendent of Prairie Hill School 15 years ago, I thought this is going to be great. 800 students, no high school drama, just K-8. This is going to be great. And then I found out that I was the whole show. I was the CFO. I was the head of curriculum. I was the head of HR. I thought, oh my gosh, what did I sign up for? And I embraced it and had a great time with it. The reason I'm telling you that is because when I became mayor of South Beloit, same thing. There's no city person that's in charge of economic development or hiring and firing. The mayor is the executive. And so you do all of that administrative stuff. And one of those areas has been economic development. And I never had my nose deep into that before, but it has been an adventure. And one of the roadblocks to economic development in that small city of South Beloit is access. We have, it would be nothing for a person come to us and say, hey, I've got an idea for this property. And then we find out the property is locked. We can't get to it. And we go through our current process. And we're not 1 month out or 6 months out. We're years out from getting a hold of that property so that we can deal with someone who has an interest, a proven interest in beginning a business or developing or building a home or building a garage on the property. So expediency, access, those are huge, huge benefits. And when you hear about keeping our money back here at home, that is an incredible, you can't overlook that. You just can't. So I'm asking you to take a strong look at this and always remember that it doesn't matter if I'm from South Beloit or Dale's from Rockton, or wherever we are always, always Winnebago County. Doesn't matter. You may not be always South Beloit, but South Beloit, we're always the county. So what you do with us impacts everybody. So I thank you for a moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Our next speaker is Attorney Roxanne Sosnowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the County Board, for letting me come and speak to you this evening. I really appreciate this opportunity. My name is Roxanne Sosnowski. I serve as the city attorney for the city of South Beloit. I also represent the village of Rockton, but I have a little bit of a unique perspective on this issue because my firm also serves as the village attorney for the village of Poplar Grove in Boone County, Illinois, as well as the city attorney for the city of Freeport, Illinois, in Stevenson County. I've had an opportunity to work with the tax trustee programs in other communities besides Winnebago County, and have played a part in discussing this issue with members of the county board over the past couple weeks and months with some of the issues that we've experienced in our communities here in Winnebago County as it relates to the trustee program. Someone once told me that the statutory options for counties to acquire tax delinquent properties really has 3 main tasks. One is to collect delinquent taxes on parcels that receive no bids from the tax buyers. The second would be to render abandoned property tax exempt and eliminate ongoing county costs. And third, provide a low-cost way for the county to take control of abandoned property and either transfer it to a new owner or convert it to some public use. And that third prong is really what's missing in the current program. And I don't want to belabor the point much because I know you've probably heard some of the issues that we as municipal attorneys have been experiencing in the past with the current program. But there's just no denying the fact that it is much easier for us as municipalities and as municipal attorneys if we have a property that we're looking to try to do something with after it's sat abandoned for 6 years, that it is just far easier to be able to work with someone locally than it is to try to serve an entity in Decatur, Illinois, or any other municipality that's outside of Winnebago County. The service issues that we're having for service of summons create delays. Trying to get in contact with whomever is running the trustee program creates delays. And I can tell you, having had the experience of working with other programs in other counties, that really doesn't change if we don't have a local agent. So I just, on behalf of myself and my firm, I would ask you to consider the fact that our opinion is that the current program has failed and that only a locally controlled program could really help dig us out of the current mess that we find ourselves in. So I just would plead with you, please, on behalf of the municipalities that I represent, to consider this local option that would give our communities the opportunity to put these abandoned properties into the hands of buyers, get these properties back on the tax rolls. And I think that our neighbors in our communities would really appreciate that opportunity to see that start to turn. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sosnowski. Our last speaker is Gary Anderson, architect, and he's also our appointee to the Land Bank. Mr. Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, county board members, over the past decade, we have seen and experienced an overwhelming advancement of blight in our community. It has stifled our growth and economic recovery. Investment in our housing stock has really been marginalized. Blight is everywhere, and no neighborhood is immune to its impact on property values. Many factors have contributed to our escalating blighted condition. Our citizens feel powerless about how to deal with it. No one seems to know anything. It creates a sense of hopelessness that no one cares. The tax trustee program is a revolving door of properties going in and out of different hands that are there only for one thing, and that is a profit at our expense. This program, for all its original intentions, was geared to different times and different circumstances. The overwhelming numbers of delinquent properties, foreclosures, and abandonment over the past decade has had an impact on our neighborhood values. We have not addressed the problem in a comprehensive way, nor have we taken the time to understand the cause and effect on the surrounding property values that this failed program has caused. Great Neighborhoods has studied multiple neighborhoods as to what has happened in our recovery from the Great Recession of '08. We have witnessed little recovery of property values since the high water mark in '08. In District 12, whole neighborhoods are 50% lower than the AIV that they were in '08 in 2018. It is even more disturbing as to how many of those property owners are from out of state and are tax purchasers. They could care less about our plight and the conditions of the property that they hold hostage. The current trustee program masquerades as a servant to help our taxing bodies collect what's owed. These delinquent and abandoned properties affect whole blocks and neighborhoods. Have you ever thought about how much this program has cost you in lost revenue because of the lower neighborhood property values that this program perpetuates? These are your neighbors that you represent. You need to take action tonight without further delay. The R1PC proposal before you is one more step in providing another tool to address the blight in our neighborhoods. The status quo is not working. It is time to redirect and provide a program that can change things, provide stability and sustainability, and most importantly, providing your neighbors a sense of hope that their neighborhoods can recover from a failed and misdirected program. Our taxing bodies want change. It's killing our housing economy and the ability to recover our lost EAV. We need a more effective program. We need change and the right tools to do it with. The law allows qualified buyers to purchase these properties and do the right thing for our long-term interests. Giving it to the highest bidder only perpetuates a failed system that has contributed to the destruction of our property values. Vote for change. Vote yes tonight for the R1PC proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. That concludes our public comments section, and we'll move on to board member correspondence. Any board member comments this evening? Seeing none, Mr. Neighbors.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to comment on the Barbara Coleman project with Rock Valley College. It's to my understanding that when we use the host fee fund for economic development, we contribute money to the Barbara Coleman project. That was a project that was geared toward the economic development of the southwest side of Rockford. And if Rock Valley College chooses to leave the Barbara Coleman project and pursue its own functions or own another project with the newspaper company or whatever project that they want to pursue, we should not have to give our $3.2 million to the Barbara Coleman project just because they're not, that isn't part of the contract anymore because it's no longer the Barbara Coleman project.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neighbors. Any other comments by board members? Mrs. Rudd. Thank you, Mr. Neighbors. Mrs. Rudd.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to piggyback on what Mr. Neighbors has said, pulling that project is a slap in the face to Southwest Rockford. And we've been slapped many times. the board granted that money, the 3 point whatever it was, for the project with Rock Valley and the city. And since it looks like they're pulling out, we're not giving that money to them anymore. That money needs to come back, stay with the county, and we need to continue the project, except some people will be left out. I'm hoping that the project will continue and it'll lift up Southwest Rockford. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Redd. Any other board member comments? Yes, I have two hands, Mr. Tassoni, then Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would also echo what Mr. Neighbors and Ms. Redd had said, too. Can you speak to, should they relocate or have different intentions, our recourse for that?
Yes, with your okay, I definitely am going to speak to that under Chairman's comments briefly, with the promise of once I get permission from one of the involved parties to forward an email that was sent to a particular board today. I think it lays out the disgust that many folks have around this discussion. And I want to make sure, as a funding partner, that you're well aware of what is going on here. So with your permission, I'll speak to it, and then more information will follow. Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Mrs. Gorel.
Thank you, Chairman. For a long time, we've been looking at that Barbara Coleman building for education and for helping people to go forward. This was really, it was so exciting to know that we were going to actually put that project together and have some type of vocational project there so that young people, especially those who are still even in high school, could probably attend. So when they came out, they would have some type of profession to look at. Today, we're letting our children out of school with no I can't say no education, but with no place to go. They have no clue. If you don't go to college, where do you go? You fall flat on your face. We've watched this for many years, and for many years, when they closed our vocational school, we really needed this project to go forward. I, too, am very disappointed in what has happened. And it's not just Southwest Rockford. They've done this to all of Rockford, where we have schools that have children in them that when they get done with high school, they need to have some place to go for a job and know how to get hired. And they've taken that away from us. I'm real sad about this and Rock Valley College and what they have done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gorel. Any other board member comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to Chairman's report. I'm just going to condense this. There's a couple disclosures there for you just have for the record. They don't require board action, but just want to put that on the record. I'll speak very briefly to the Barbara Coleman discussion that's been in the media quite a bit, been a subject of discussion the last few weeks. I attended the Rock Valley board meeting a couple nights ago, and the comments made in that open meeting that absolutely were inaccurate about basic facts it was completely dishonest. Some of the most respected people that I know in this community were involved in the financial discussions of this particular project, people whose character is unquestioned over many, many years, and the misinformation used to kill one of the most important projects I've seen in my lifetime, and to misrepresent financial data to undermine discussion as that is absolutely disgusting. I'm devastated as somebody who was affiliated very directly with Rock Valley College. I will not get over this anytime soon. I think we as a community just left tens of millions of dollars on the table. Absolutely unacceptable what we just did. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to that. You're going to hear a whole lot more, I'm sure, in the next several weeks. And I hope this can be rearranged in some way that is less destructive to our community. Thank you for that opportunity. And with that, we will move on to our next item of business, County Administrator's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just 4 items real briefly. Next week, we'll be starting our labor negotiations with the Fraternal Order of Police, which covers the sheriff's deputies for a new agreement. The previous agreement expired September 30th, 2019. Second item, the probation department has received some additional funding from the state for some current positions they have, and also possibly some additional probation positions with it seemingly being the dollar impact would be positive to the county. We're going to be meeting with the chief judge and the director of court services to determine the final recommendations to this board. We're still waiting for the final reports from Baker Tilly on the purchasing and the information technology reports that were done. And last item, the finance director for the county, Molly Terranoni, and myself will be meeting with Attorney Zito from that represents Cherry Valley to try and straighten out the TIF reports that need to be done.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure that'll be of interest to Mrs. Sosnowski. That's been something she's been involved with, so thank you for mentioning that. Any department head updates? Seeing none, we'll move on. I think we've covered some of these issues under unfinished business. I would just say for the record, the closed session committee minutes for May 2nd, I know that's coming to a committee or committees near you very quickly, and we'll get that issue resolved. With that, we will move on to new business. There's going to be a recommendation going to economic development. It's been a longstanding discussion that carries over from fiscal year 19 related to Project E, $150,000 from host fees, and that'll be coming to Mr. Billick's committee here in the very near future. I want to thank Mr. Dornbush and I believe the State's Attorney's Office has been working on that item. The next item, the last item before standing committee reports is the board appointment, Otter Creek Lake Utility District, the reappointment of Edward Herman. That is in, I believe, for a first reading, so we can take that up in a couple of weeks if that works for you guys. Seeing that, we will move on to standing committee reports, and I'll ask Mr. McDonald to come up for the Operations and Administrative Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Operations Committee has got the first item is a resolution authorizing the execution of a contract with Region 1 Planning Council to act as the County of Winnebago's agent in the operation of a delinquent tax program, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution to appoint R1 as agent for the tax delinquent program. Second by Mr. Westcott, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Booker, Mr. Fellers, and Mr. Gurl. Thank you very much. Item has now been motion and second is before the board for discussion or questions. Any discussion or questions? Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Mr. Dunn alluded to, there is a revised agreement. I think, Mr. Chapman, you've got several copies printed out. If we could get those out there, but I would make the motion to amend the IGA and discuss first the amendment.
We got a motion by Mr. McDonald to amend the motion that has been put on the floor. May I have a second? Mr. Gurl, thank you very much, and Mr. Billick, thank you. There's a motion and a second related to amending the IGA. Thank you very much. That is making its way around at this time.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, to summarize Mr. Dunn's email, the really quick couple bullet points, cleaned up revolving account to the uniform term of program proceeds account, provided clarification that the county departments get reimbursed for actual expenses incurred quarterly, not annually. We removed the $15,000 annual limit on county expenses related to postage. That was the bullet point.
And then the fourth quick change, I'll jump in, Mr. McDonald.
Oh, thank you, yeah.
Is, and you can take it back over if you want, but it's related to the bidder that the board would approve if there are multiple bids and there is a recommendation not to go with the highest bid, that the board would approve, not, basically if there was ever that type of situation, board approval if there would be a situation not to go with the highest bidder when there's multiple bids.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, you're correct.
So that is the motion, second. That is before the board. The amended motion is before the board. Those 4 items have been read in. Thank you, Mr. McDonald, for that. I know there's been a lot of discussion on that. Any other follow-up questions, clarifications, comments, concerns? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk then. Any other comments, Mr. McDonald? With that, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll. A yes vote passes, a no vote rejects.
Mrs. Gorel? Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors?
Yes.
Mrs. Red? Yes. Mr. Sagato is absent. Mr. Schultz? No. Mr. Tassoni?
Yes.
Mr. Webster? Yes. Mr. Westcott? Yes. Mr. Arena?
Yes.
Mr. Billich? Yes. Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer? Yes. Mr. Butita?
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby? Yes. Mr. Fellers?
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia?
Yes.
Mr. Girl?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, 18 yes, 1 no, 1 absent.
Okay, thank you very much. Motion passes. Appreciate that. Thanks for all the hard work. I'll go back to Mr. McDonald for our next item. Oh, I'm sorry, the motion, I'm sorry, that went way too easy. We had a motion and a second on the amendment. So we'll bring that back then. Come on back in, Mrs. Crosby, just so we're clear on the floor. A motion and a second. We have amended the motion. We have an amended motion with those 4 changes. I apologize for that mistake. The item is now before the board, the amended motion. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you. Just a single question here on the amended motion, the amended IGA regarding bidding. Property could go to the county board for consideration of the sale. Is it the intention that this board or a committee of this board would have to make a vote on whether to approve the sale to a non-highest bidder or to overrule the recommendation? Is that the intent of this? I'm seeing the chairman shake his head and Mr. McDonald nod, so maybe some clarification.
Repeat your question, Mr. Fellers.
Sure. Is it the intent that in the event that the highest bidder is deemed non-responsible or not a responsible buyer, is it then the intent of this amendment for the decision on the sale of that property to come to a vote before the full county board on approving that decision or rejecting that decision? Is that correct?
It is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other follow-ups? Follow-up, Mr. Fellers.
No, nothing.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, with that, I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Mr. Hoffman? Yes. Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors?
Yes.
Mrs. Red? Yes. Mr. Schultz? Mr. Tassoni?
Yes.
Mr. Webster? Yes. Mr. Westcott?
Yes.
Mr. Arena?
Yes.
Mr. Billich?
Yes.
Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer? Mr. Butita?
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby?
Yes.
Mr. Fellers?
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia?
Yes.
Mr. Girl?
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that's 18 yes, 1 no, 1 absent.
Okay, there we go. Got it done. Thank you very much. Next item of business, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next is an ordinance amending Chapter 70 of the Winnebago County Code of Ordinances related to waste haulers and solid waste, and that is to be laid over.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald.
Our next item is a resolution authorizing the establishment of Winnebago County Community Mental Health Board, and I move.
We have a resolution on the establishment of a Winnebago County Mental Health Board. May I have a second? Mr. Girl, thank you. Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Neighbors. We have a motion, a second on the establishment of the Mental Health Board. Any discussion, questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? We've passed this unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next item is a resolution authorizing the chairman of the county board to execute agreement with National Able Network. and I make the motion.
We got a motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution authorizing chairman of the board to execute agreement with National Able Network. Second by Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Booker. The item is now before the board, and I believe this is coming back to us with a very little bit of language cleanup. Is that correct?
Not only language cleanup, Chairman, but there were 2 providers previously. This time there's only 1. The other provider was not able to come to agreement with us.
Okay. So we have the National Able Network before the board. Any discussion, questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. I know we have a board member who is only here until 7:30, so if it's okay, I want to not go into closed session on item 3. We're going to come back to closed session for... We do not have to now? Oh, okay. Well, then we'll just keep going with the agenda as laid out. Thank you very much. We're going to have Mr. McDonald pinch hit on the Finance Committee for Mr. Salgado this evening, and we'll go right back to you, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item is a resolution authorizing an increase in the salary of the Winnebago County Public Defender.
Motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution authorizing increase to the public defender. May I have a second? Mr. Hoffman, thank you very much, and Mr. Westcott. Item is motion seconded. Any discussion, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is a resolution authorizing execution of an intergovernmental cooperation agreement for the operation and funding of the Winnebago County Emergency Telephone System.
Got a motion by Mr. McDonald on item 2 under finance, the agreement for the operation and funding of the emergency telephone system. May I have a second, please? Mr. Booker and Mr. Neighbors, thank you very much. Any discussion by board members?
I'll speak to this a little bit, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had been paying the city for the 911 calls that they answer. You know, we've got Spring Creek and Alpine. We've got areas, pockets of unincorporated Winnebago County within the cities. Therefore, the call takers for the city get most of those calls. This went up roughly $60,000. This is the item that we had hoped at the beginning of the budget cycle we could absorb it ourselves and do it in-house in the county. We can't currently do that. We're not set up to do that. I would urge us to take a look what we can do. This is a 1-year contract. Let's see what we can do for next year to try to better plan, and maybe we can become self-sufficient. I'll be voting no. This is something we need to do, but I'll be voting no on this tonight out of the premise that I'm trying to urge things to move to the county and have a more fully staffed setup.
Thank you very much. Any discussion or questions by board members on item 2? It's the emergency telephone system agreement with the city of Rockford. Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? No. We got Mr. McDonald's a no. I believe all other board members were casting a yes vote for. Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is a resolution authorizing the settlement of pending litigation.
We got a resolution authorizing the settlement of pending litigation. May I have a second, please? Second by Mr. Gurl. Since it's obviously not a very description, I'm going to ask somebody to speak to this, maybe the state's attorney or Mr. Chapman. Just give a quick overview for the record what this entails before we take a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This relates to a complaint filed by an individual from the River Bluff Nursing Home. I think it was a human rights complaint. There's been discussions with the Finance Committee, I think, on 2 or 3 different occasions relative to this particular claim. There was, I believe, Charlotte LeClaire was representing the county. We had discussions with her attorney and came to a settlement amount of $80,000 with other considerations relative to the county. So I believe it's a good settlement on our part.
And there's just the name on the settlement. For
the individual is let's see here, Suzanne Delaney.
Delaney, $80,000. Okay. Any discussion by board members? Any other follow-up by legal? No. All those in favor? The resolution is to settle this pending litigation as described by Mr. Chapman. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And that concludes your double duty tonight, Mr. McDonald. Thank you very much. Next item, zoning, Mr. Webster.
Thank you. The zoning committee has one item on the agenda tonight, and that is a special use permit 0719. This is for the first reading. It's a special use permit for the retreat center on Fish Hatchery Road, which is in Mr. Booker's district. So it's in for a first reading, but due to the fact that it came from zoning board of appeals, unanimous approval, and zoning committee this evening with unanimous approval, I would move to suspend on this one.
Got a motion to suspend the rules, which would allow us separately to take action tonight. Second by Mr. Kelly, Mr. Westcott, Mr. Fellers, Mrs. Gorel, and I think I saw a hand up in the back, Mr. Boomer. Motion is second to suspend. Any quick discussion on the motion to suspend the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We've suspended the rules. Mr. Webster.
Thank you. I would move to approve SU 0719 with conditions as they came from zoning board of appeals.
Got a motion by Mr. Webster to approve SU 0719, special use permit with conditions. May I have a second, please? Mr. Neighbors, thank you very much. Item has now been motioned and seconded. Any discussion or questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Webster.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Next item of business, Economic Development Committee, Mr. Belichick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So the state's attorney's asked to give an overview from a legal standpoint on the cannabis tax. Since we have this action item, we wanted to have her present to the board, and I appreciate the research and the background work done by the state's attorney's office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We help with the lighting.
The lamp is like going dead. We're gonna have to replace it.
Oh. Okay. That doesn't help.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I wanted to just give all of you an overview of the tax breakdown within the Cannabis Tax Regulation Act. The act itself is over 600 pages, and so what I've tried to do is to digest portions of it just to point out the potential, and I'm emphasizing that, the potential tax revenue that the state has laid out in the Cannabis Tax Regulation Act. They're not going to be able to see it?
Not really.
Oh,
They'll be able to
okay.
see it in the back.
Okay. All right.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to have to read to you like your kindergartners, but that's okay. All right, so first of all, and I'm going to move this closer to the podium. So first of all, the statute has laid out who can sell marijuana. Okay, so those currently licensed to sell medical cannabis have been provided licenses to sell recreational cannabis. So within Winnebago County, I believe you have 2 medical marijuana dispensaries. So they have already been granted a license to sell recreational marijuana, even though that does not go into effect until January 1st, 2020. Okay, so you already have 2 establishments that are licensed within Winnebago County. There are categories of establishments that can be involved in the recreational marijuana trade, I'll use that term. First of all, you have the dispensary, and these are again defined within the statute. This is an establishment that provides the cannabis products to adult consumers. You have the processor. This is an establishment that will infuse other products with the active ingredient in cannabis, which is THC. So for example, cannabis-infused brownies or candies, right? The next establishment is listed as the transporter, This is the establishment that will transport the cannabis between businesses who are licensed to sell recreational cannabis. You have the craft grower. These are individuals of businesses who can grow between 5,000 and 14,000 square feet of cannabis. And there are designated areas and how they have to secure them as well. And then you have the cultivator. And this is the cultivation center that can grow up to 210,000 square feet. Now, why did I delineate all of those different businesses for you? Because under the Tax Regulation Act on cannabis, if you pass a resolution to impose a tax, you could tax each of those types of establishments. So that's why I wanted to outline those for you. Licensing fees are designated based upon the type of business. So the state has currently says for cultivators, the license fees are $100,000. For dispensaries, it's $30,000. They also have a lower license fee for what they call social equity partners, and these are individuals that could get a license through a grant that the state has imputed within the statute. There is a business development fee for cultivators, $750,000, or 5% of total sales, whichever is less. Dispensaries up to $200,000, and then a lower fee for those social equity partners. All right, so how is the state taxing marijuana? It depends on the potency of the cannabis. So there's a 10% cannabis tax on cannabis flower with a potency of less than 35% THC, which is the active ingredient in cannabis. There's a 20% tax on all products that are infused with cannabis. These are edible products. There's a 25% tax on any product with THC concentration of higher than 35%. So the higher the potency, the higher the tax from the state. How is the tax revenue to be distributed? Now, according to the statute, after the state has paid for the administrative processing of licenses, et cetera, this is how the tax revenue remaining will be distributed. 2% to public education and safety campaigns, 8% for local government funding for preventing and training law enforcement, 25% to recover, reinvest, and renew. That is their grant program that's incorporated in the statute. 20% for mental health services and substance abuse programs, and I know that was a question that some of you had during Dr. Martell's presentation. 10% to pay the unpaid bills of the state, and 35% to go into the general revenue fund. So these are percentages that are written into the statute currently. I'm used to touch, so let me see. Will this touch? It will not touch. Okay. I think the mouse is dying. All right, here. Get back up to the right slide.
We'll get that corrected for next meeting.
All right, so again, the Tax Revenue Act provides for 25% of the cannabis revenue to go into a grant program, again, after all expenses are paid. Now, taxing cannabis businesses. The statute provides that local governments may consider whether to permit cannabis lounges, which is another business that has been considered by the legislation, and how to regulate them. And cannabis lounges would be a place that individuals could smoke recreational cannabis within that respective cannabis lounge, because currently they can only smoke it at their home and private. And so there's a push to allow them to basically be able to socialize while they're smoking recreational marijuana. Cannabis tax by local government, again, if you're taxing dispensaries, it cannot exceed 3% of gross receipts from the sale of non-medical cannabis. The tax must be imposed in 0.25% increments. The tax is collected by the Department of Revenue for the state of Illinois, which may retain 1.5% of the amount distributed to each municipality as an administrative fee. So if you pass a resolution to impose taxes, the tax is collected by the Illinois Department of Revenue, and then they take a 1.5% administrative fee, and then the remaining tax comes back to the municipality or the county. In order to collect the tax, the municipality or county must adopt and file a tax ordinance with the Illinois Department of Revenue before June 1st, 2020. So if the resolution is passed, then that ordinance would be filed with the Illinois Department of Revenue. The tax revenue is scheduled to start being collected September 1st of 2020. But if you followed the news, there are a lot of items in the statute that need clarification. So I anticipate that there would be upcoming and ongoing amendments to clarify the questions that local governments have regarding the tax statute. Reasonable restrictions are written into the statute regarding cannabis zones. So a unit of local government, whether you're home rule or not, within an unincorporated territory of the county may elect to reasonably restrict the location of these businesses through an ordinance. Now, there's a caveat within the act that says you cannot pass any ordinance or local legislation that would be contrary to the act itself. So even though you can restrict, for example, businesses in unincorporated areas of the county, if a person lives there and they're smoking marijuana privately in their home, because that is consistent with the Cannabis Tax Act, you would not be able to impede that. And they make that very clear within the statute. Let's get that slide, move on. Okay. Excuse me. All right, so the statute spends a lot of time on the 25% tax revenue for this grant, and they call it the 3 R's: restore, reinvest, and renew. So basically, this money is meant to fund licenses and licensing fees for those individuals in those areas within the county that were disparately impacted when marijuana, 30 grams or less, was a crime. And so basically they've allowed 25% to provide licensing assistance to those individuals who may have been convicted of those crimes, which going forward are not going to be criminal acts anymore. So that's really what that grant funding is for. There's a social justice component in the statute which requires mandated expungements of individuals previously convicted of possessing 30 grams of cannabis or less. It does not apply if there were other charges that went along with that cannabis charge. Then there's discretionary expungements which apply to individuals possessing 30 grams of cannabis or more, up to 500 grams. That is discretionary, which means it's not automatic. They have to petition to have it expunged, and the governor's office has to consider a pardon. With respect to the automatic expungements, my office is being proactive. We are starting to identify those cases within Winnebago County so that we can obviously be proactive. The statute allows for state's attorneys to get involved. We are not mandated to do so, but I believe that it might just streamline the process, so I'm trying to be proactive in that. Currently, going back to maybe 2007, I believe, working with court administration who has been pulling those records for us, we've identified potentially maybe approximately 10,000 cases that we will be going through to see if they would qualify for either automatic expungement or discretionary expungement. I also just wanted to advise you regarding the workplace component in that statute regarding zero tolerance for drugs. Certainly, employers can still have a zero tolerance policy. However, what you need to know is that there is an amendment that was made to an act which indicates whenever a substance is legal, an employer cannot discipline someone for using that substance. So now, since recreational marijuana is legal, you can't just per se discipline someone for using it. You have to have probable cause or reasonable cause. For example, if that person is under the influence at the workplace, then certainly you would have grounds. So that's just a little caveat for you to know. And then the exception is that the Department of Transportation still regulates and controls that industry, so they are excluded from that portion of the statute. And let me just go back for a second here. So that statute is the Right to Privacy in the Workplace Act that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So they amended that act to include recreational marijuana. So it's currently incorporated. Last slide here, which was my visual for you, unfortunately I can't show it to you, is just showing you and giving you a snapshot of the estimated tax revenue for the first year, and this is assuming they start collecting it September 1st of 2020. The annual sales estimated by Crane's business is $1.5 billion. Tax revenue estimated that would go to the state would be $500 million, and tax revenue that would be disseminated to local governments and counties would be approximately $25 million per year. Now, keep in mind, I mean, there are 102 counties within the state of Illinois, and this is based on the tax rate of 27%. So just to give you an idea of the types of businesses that you will be able to tax individually, depending upon how many are operating within Winnebago County, and the tax revenue projected that would come back to local governments throughout the state, given the projected annual sales. There are some concerns by some commentators who have written about the act regarding allowing it to get up and running and not to tax it so heavily that individuals will go to the black market. But one of the reasons my colleagues and I lobbied for a law enforcement component when we knew that this would pass was because we knew that law enforcement would be taxed with trying to do their job. And so this 8% tax revenue that is coming into the counties for law enforcement is very critical in supporting law enforcement in their endeavors. So that concludes the presentation, and I'll be happy to ask any questions that you may have. I just wanted to give you a snapshot of the numbers.
Thank you very much. I see some hands pop up. I'll go my right to left. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got three quick. I'll try to make it very brief. The expungements. What happens in where somebody has a more significant charge is pled down to that type of charge? Will the plead have anything to do with it?
Yes, it could, because that would not be an automatic expungement, so it would be a discretionary expungement, which means the state's attorney would look at it and determine if we did have an objection. If, for example, you know, it's estimated that there were over 770,000 plus individuals that were impacted in the past prior to this legislation. Over 72% of those individuals, we believe, were convicted in Cook County. So the remainder of them would have been throughout the state of Illinois. And as I said, being proactive and trying to identify those within Winnebago County, but we have to look at each case to make sure that they do qualify, and then discretionarily that it is the proper and equitable thing to do, which is the purpose of that social justice component within the legislation. And so we as state attorneys throughout the state want to make sure that we're being compliant with that legislation and being proactive, because again, you have to notify the individuals. Individuals may have moved out of state and not know that they can get their records clear. So that's one of the reasons that I want to be proactive in identifying those cases so that if they do qualify for automatic expungement, that can occur. And then if they apply, do come under the discretionary component of that, then we can look at those cases and identify those. That's going to be using resources in my office that I plan on doing, using my supervisors to assist in going through those documents.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. I'm worried about somebody who had a much more significant charge that pled down, now gets completely scot-free, so I appreciate that. And you may not be prepared to answer this one just yet, but I'm just curious, county policy, I know where I'm employed, if I get hurt, I get drug screened, I could be terminated. Are we going to refresh or make sure that everybody's aware that drugs are still not allowed as an employee for Winnebago County? If you do fail a drug screen due to workman's comp insurance typically requires it, that you can still be terminated from the county if found to have it in your system?
You, employers can still have the drug screening, but what you'll need to do is to spell out more specifically, the basis of that and what is expected at the workplace. Now, science tells us the THC component in marijuana stays in the system up to 30 days. So basically what you're going to have to do if you're looking to identify someone who might be in the workplace and under the influence is to have your HR staff trained to recognize the signs of someone who is under the influence. In the law enforcement arena, we call them drug recognition experts, but basically you're going to have people in that workplace that have that training that can identify individuals who might be under the influence. Obviously, certain professions, like first responders who are on call 24 hours a day, doctors, nurses, for liability purposes, obviously, that's a consideration because, if your doctor has that in their system, it doesn't matter whether you believe they're under the influence. If something goes wrong, then their employer is going to be on the hook for that. So
Absolutely. And the last item quickly, I would urge my fellow board members, don't get too excited about the taxes. I think we're going to end up taxing the snot out of this stuff to where people are just going to buy from the local dealer anyways. So I would urge us, instead of, let's wait it out and see what the numbers really are. Thank you.
okay.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. State Attorney Height Ross, you might not know the answer to this question, but what's the rationale to waiting until September to begin taxing?
That's written in the statute.
But why would they, I don't understand, if you're going to sell it, why wouldn't you tax it right when you begin selling it?
I don't know, but as I indicated earlier, there are several amendments, I believe, that the legislature will probably be considering. Originally, they indicated that no one would be licensed to sell recreational marijuana prior to January 1st, 2020, but they have already issued licenses. So I don't know that they will wait till September to start collecting the revenue on taxes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I had Mr. Webster, then Mr. Butita, then Mr. Neighbors. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, just real quickly, you spoke of the percentages of potency, percentages of taxes at various levels of things, percentages of tax where it goes to, which department or municipal or public safety, and the percentages for a number of things there. and I was trying to write them down, I couldn't do that. So my question to you is, could you just please give us the Reader's Digest version with the percentages of various things you spoke of? And where they go to?
Okay.
You follow
yes.
me?
Yes, I do.
That's all I need, that part.
Okay, so the percentage taxing slide, 2% public education and safety campaigns.
Yeah, is that something you could email to us, a copy of that?
I can get all of you a hard copy of this. Do you want me to go through all of them again for you? I'm happy to. I can
No,
just read them all.
if you just send it to me in an email or a hard copy, the one, that'd be fine.
Yes, I'll, actually, yeah, I'll get that to you. Sorry, I didn't know, I wasn't told that wasn't working when I had it set up, so I apologize.
That's all right. I didn't want to drag it out any longer.
Any follow-ups, Mr. Webster? No, well, thank you.
No,
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Mr. Petito.
Thank you. State's Attorney, hi Ross, can you, just for clarification purposes, the county board cannot prohibit anybody from using recreational marijuana, but as a board, we can prohibit sales of cannabis in unincorporated Winnebago, is that correct?
You can restrict and zone those businesses like you zone any other establishment.
Okay.
Yes. And you can prohibit individuals from smoking marijuana recreationally within their home if they live in unincorporated Winnebago County.
Thank you. If follow-up, Mr. Petito? Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Petito. Mr. Neighbors? No? Mr. Tassoni, then Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Basically, my question was the same as Mr. Petito's. I think there's a misconception within the community that the county board has the authority to make Winnebago County a dry county entirely. And I think the public needs to know that. We do not have that authority. We can only restrict the sale and unincorporation outside the city limits.
And Mr. Tassoni, thank you for that, because the misconception comes from some language within the statute which is not clear. And I think those are one of the areas that the legislature is going to work on, because there's a certain section that talks about opting out if you have over 500,000 people in a precinct, which basically would eliminate all other areas within the state outside of the Cook County area. So I think that's where the misconception comes in. But when dealing with local counties, they refer to it as regulation and zoning. But then it cannot be totally contrary to the statute, which my reading of that is, which means you can't just blanketly say you can't have a business at all, but you can zone it in unincorporated Winnebago County. But there is some language in the statute that could be the premise of that misconception.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then I want to follow up on that. So one of the next steps, probably before January 1, would be an update to the uniform code and update our zoning ordinances to, if we want to restrict certain types of these businesses to certain zones or designations, we would want to do that before anything else, because if it's not mentioned in the code, therefore there's no zoning restriction.
That's correct. You would want to pass a zoning ordinance with respect to these businesses, and if you were going to work on one, I would suggest using all of the different categories of businesses that are delineated within the statute, within the ordinance, to make it very clear that you're looking at all of these.
So, and just to follow up on that, because it's not currently in the unified ordinance, that someone could theoretically in one of these categories open up a shop anywhere, if it's zone commercial or zone retail, they could open up a shop, just once they got a license, until we adjust that code that would specify which, one of those zones they could operate in. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Fellows, and that's a valid point.
Thank you. And then another question here, as it relates to expungements, You've said you've identified, you and I have talked privately about this, but we've identified about 10,000 potential expungements. What additional resources does your office need over the next year or potentially two to help move these through quickly as to not affect your caseload, going forward on the more important items?
Well, we're going to be working over in triple time to try to get those in. Again, obviously, additional funding would certainly be welcomed to try to address the social component of the statute, but significant hours, because we have to prepare those petitions after going through those cases, as Mr. McDonald said, to make sure that they do comply, and then work with the chief judge to get those scheduled and to have an assistant in court to address that.
So if I could ask, my ask of you then would be to potentially to put together a solution, cognizant of what the county's finances are like, but to expand your office during this ultimately as a temporary period, right, to move these through quickly, what you would need so that we have something that we can look at and ideally apply budget towards.
I appreciate that, and I'm happy to do that, Mr. Fellers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fellers. Any other questions, comments by board members? Seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation. And we will move right into our next item, and I'll have Mr. Billick step in. And sorry for the technical difficulties. We'll get that corrected in 2 weeks. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a reminder, I would too like a copy of that presentation or a hard copy.
We'll send that around.
I'll get a hard copy to everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Billick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight we're reading in the ordinance amending the Winnebago County Code of Ordinances by the addition of Article 6 to Chapter 78, imposing county cannabis retailers occupation tax, and I so move.
So this is in for a layover? So you just read that in, or do you want to make a motion to suspend? Or just lay it over?
I actually didn't know that that was in for layover. I would actually look to suspend that one.
Okay, we have a motion, thank you, by Mr. Billick to suspend the rules. We've read the item in. There's a motion to suspend the rules, which would allow us separately to vote this evening on the county cannabis retail occupation tax. Second by Mr. Westcott, Mr. Neighbors and Mr. Fellers, and Mr. Neighbors, not Mr. Fellers. The motion to suspend the rules is before the board. Any quick points, Mr. Fellers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there any time component that we would need to, reason why we need to suspend? Then I would ask that we not suspend it and just simply read this in and give another 2 weeks for the community to just to give us any feedback on how they're feeling. So this, if there's no reason to rush, we shouldn't rush this. So I'm going to vote no to suspend the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. Just, I'm looking for heads to nod. You're not seeing any
Actually, there is no time crunch. Actually, we don't need to even motion to suspend. I do know that it passed pretty favorably in our committee. One of the other things was actually I did want to update a lot of people as far as some of the things that Marilyn said I have been in agreement with. So, but aside from that, there is no time crunch. Absolutely not. We can actually give it another little bit if that's totally
Okay.
fine.
Would you like to withdraw your motion?
I can withdraw. I can withdraw the motion.
So, we did have a second, so,
Actually.
but we could, is there any reason we can't withdraw once we've motioned a second? We had a motion to suspend the rules. The motion to suspend, can that be withdrawn once it's seconded? Okay, so if that's okay, we'll go ahead and withdraw the motion, not take any motion or take any action to suspend the rules.
Can I make a clarification in the
Yes, sir.
timing portion of that? As for the timing goes, we were under a time crunch. Originally, actually, we were going to vote on this around the budget, the same day that we were voting on the budget, that county board meeting. However, with the state moving that date back, that's why we do not have a time crunch at this point.
Thank you. So excuse any procedural bumps there on my part. We'll bring it back in 2 weeks. Okay, Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a comment on the proposed tax on that. If we can have a conversation in caucus or in committee regarding how we are going to disperse those funds once we get those in, because I think that should be a robust conversation. We should look at public safety, the jail, our court system. As the state's attorney alluded to, she is going to be hard pressed on getting these cases expunged. So that conversation needs to happen, I think, before or at the same time when we pass this code. So there's no question about where that 3% or whatever that number will be, where it will be going. So I would implore you to do that, please.
Thank you.
Right, and in response to that, actually, Mr. Grohl, good point that you brought up. We've actually been kind of in discussion about that already. We're organizing, me and Chris are organizing to set up a meeting between staff and the chairs of the two other committees of Public Safety and Finance. I've already discussed with Aaron, and Jaime I've already discussed at length with. We were already planning and anticipating on adding that amendment. Per Steve's, Mr. Chapman's recommendations, the reason why this doesn't include any breakdown of budgetary portion of it is it would be harder to change, because then we'd have to change the whole ordinance later on down the line. At this point, if we pass the ordinance, then it would just be a slight amendment as far as what we decide what we want to do for percentages. That is in discussion already. We've already discussed with Dr. Martell as well. We're going to set up a meeting and kind of hammer that out and present it that way when time comes.
Thank you, Mr. Gurl. Thank you, Mr. Billick. Any follow-up? Yes, Mr. Butita.
Thank you. I was prepared to amend this tonight, and obviously I'll hold off on doing that till it comes before the board, but I just want to go on record to say that I think that the legislation that was passed by the General Assembly and the assignment of governor, it did not do a service to our citizens. So I was hoping that at some point in the future, I mean, the question in front of us is about taxation, but I was hoping to address whether the county wants to participate in that retail sales in unincorporated areas. And I wish it had been addressed first, but it isn't. But now I'm understanding it's more of a zoning issue. So I'm all in favor for laying it over and hopefully getting a zoning issue before us and get a reading of the board for those who are in favor and not in favor of retail sales in unincorporated Winnebago County. I, for one, am not in favor of it. I think Dr. Martell's presentation a couple of weeks ago was right on as far as the societal and behavioral problems that we're going to encounter going forward because of this legislation. So I'm not in favor of it, but we'll wait 2 weeks to address that. Maybe in the meantime, we can start thinking about the zoning part of it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Butita. So we got weed and a casino devices. Any other items, Mr. Billick?
We do, just for another reading, I got the ordinance the next item would be ordinance amending the Winnebago County Code of Ordinances to provide for video gaming as allowed by the Illinois Video Gaming Act.
And you've read that in, and that will lay over?
Correct.
Okay. And then that last item there was no action taken out of committee, so we're going to come back with the Magic Waters Park District property tax discussion. Is that correct?
Correct. I do believe Chris spoke to you before. We were going to strike that out from tonight's meeting because we did not have a quorum yesterday.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next item of business. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have anything else, sir?
No, that's it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Billick. Next item of business, Personnel Policy Committee, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Personnel and Policies Committee has 4 resolutions to read in tonight and 1 report. The first resolution is an ordinance fixing the county holiday schedules for 2020, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. Fiducia, resolution fixing county holiday schedule for 2020. May I have a second? Mr. Webster, thank you. Any discussion on the adjustment in the holiday schedule for 2020? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next resolution is authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental cooperation agreement for animal control. I would like to thank the state's attorney and Mr. Carpenter for their diligence in getting this done. This is something that's been long and a hard road to do, and I so move.
Got a motion by Mr. Fiducia on the IGA with the City of Rockford for Animal Services. May I have a second? Several hands up, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Gurl. Thank you very much. Item is now before the board. Any discussion or questions? Just just for the record, the first year, there's two different payment amounts. Can we just get that read in for the record? So that there's a kind of a payback amount. Could somebody speak to that?
I think Mr. Carpenter could.
Okay.
The first payment, or the payback amount, is the $497,000 from, I think it's from 2 years ago. And then the next year is $400,000 for the year that just completed. And then it goes up 2% per year after that, so it'll be $408,000 next year.
Got it. Thank you very much. The two notable policy issues that I remember that have been in the media, one is that we no longer pick up wildlife, dead wildlife on the road, I believe is the case. I want to make sure that I'm not saying something that's inaccurate.
That's correct.
Okay. And then the second one is the hours of operation between midnight and 6 a.m. have been adjusted. Is that correct?
That's also correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Refresh my memory, was this budgeted? Did we budget this amount for the year?
I will look to Mr. Chapman if we put in an amount of money for the fiscal year 20 budget.
I believe we did. I believe Mr. Frazier has indicated to the committee at their meeting that he can live with the dollar amount that we're going to receive in terms of providing service.
I'm more concerned that we will need a budget amendment to cover off any deficiencies between what we budgeted for in terms of this payment and what we're actually totally paying out.
Well, I think, as I indicated, Mr. Frazier stated that he has the ability to provide the services to the city with the personnel that he has.
Okay.
And then am I to take that you're saying that that amount of money was put into the fiscal year 20 budget?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other follow-up by board members? Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just so that I'm clear on payments, after we adopt this, within 10 days, they're going to give us $897,240. And then that covers the past due. And for the services from now until 2020, they pay after the service has been provided? Is that how this works?
Yes.
Okay.
And
All
each
right.
year, there's a 2% increase each year.
But after we've done the work, not before?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. Any other comments on this IGA with the City of Rockford related to animal services? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next resolution is authorizing the signing of a resolution with the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, and this is okayed by all of the represented unions for the county, and I so move.
Got a motion by Mr. Fiducia on the resolution to adopt the annual 1,000-hour standard for IMRF participation. May I have a second, please? A second, Mr. Booker and Mr. Westcott. And I believe this would take the current amount of 600 hours and move it up to 1,000. That's on a go-forward basis. So, for example, we could not make that retro to Mr. Chapman. Is that? Okay, that's correct. So it's on a go-forward basis. Any other discussion or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia.
Next is a resolution to approve a truck purchase for River Bluff Nursing Home. I'd like to speak to that.
All right, we got a motion by Mr. Fiducia to approve the purchase of a truck for River Bluff. May I have a second? Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Westcott, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Girl. Motion and second, and I'll go to Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This vehicle is not going to be exclusively for River Bluff. It will be at River Bluff, but they have a pickup truck out there now which is in really decrepit shape. And they use it for plowing the north campus. That would be animal services, the 911, the road going up to 911 in the River Bluff parking lot. We're looking to buy a used vehicle not to exceed $25,000. And we'll put the existing plow on that, and that has been budgeted for, and I so move.
So we have that motion and a second already by Mr. Fiducia on this item for the truck at out of River Bluff. Any other discussion or questions by board members? Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fiducia, do you know, I mean, I thought it saw upwards of 39. I'm assuming that's if it's equipped with plow and salt spreader or whatever else. But then, has anybody just investigated through the state bid on what a new vehicle of need would cost?
I could answer that. The purchasing has looked at that, and the type of pickup truck that we're going to need, that I believe it's going to be in the $30,000 range. Is that right?
Ian?
It's not necessarily the cost, it was gonna take middle of January before we'd get it. They're running that far behind,
And just for the record.
to order a new one.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, Ann. Ann, thank you. Just for the record, the purchase amount, again, for this item, Mr. Fiducia or Ann?
Not to exceed 25,000.
Not to exceed. Well, that sounds like we exceeded it.
No,
No,
we're looking at a truck not to exceed 25,000. The state bid was 39,000?
no, it says in the paragraph, the second from the bottom, it says not to exceed 39,000, because trucks are running, this is a heavy-duty 4x4, but we did locate one for 30,500, and it's a 2019, and it's brand new. So it actually will be a lot less, but we didn't know when we put this together.
So it's a not to exceed 39,000 there. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We're probably going to have to amend this resolution because on the top paragraph, it says 25,000, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs down, it says 39,000.
The first paragraph is just a quote from the purchasing ordinance. It's our standard quote we put in as far as purchasing procedures, what we have to do. That's just our standard quote, but the part that counts is the second to the bottom, and that's why we said low mileage, late model, and not to exceed, because the last one we found that was even decent was like 37.5. But like I said, today I was able to locate these in DeKalb.
So the first part, you're referencing our current purchasing code, and because we exceed 25,000, it has to come to the board. So we're following
Yes.
purchasing.
Yes, that's,
You're acknowledging that we're following purchasing policy, and then it's not to exceed 39,000.
yeah, you'll see that almost in all of the purchasing ordinance that I bring through, because that tells us why we're here, for
Okay.
you.
Thank you. That makes sense now.
And I was mistaken on that.
No, I'm glad we cleaned that up, Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have we explored using just a private company to do the plowing for them instead? I mean, this seems really expensive for a single year one truck.
I could speak to that too. The truck is also going to be used for other things, during the summer months out at the campus. We're in need of the truck. The truck is so bad right now that they can't drive it on the street.
But I guess just follow up, my question being that, I mean, that they need a utility truck is one thing, that they need a Ford F-350 that's, used, going to cost us $39,000 essentially, versus a 5 to 10-year-old F-150 that's still in pretty good shape that we may spend 15 to 20 on, and then use the savings to have someone else actually do the plowing work as needed. If there's no snow, there's no snow. If there's snow, there's snow. I mean, I'm just wondering if we might save ourselves a few bucks here and there by separating out the need of a really heavy duty for plowing versus the need of a utility truck.
I could speak to that, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fiducia.
One of the reasons you got to understand is River Bluff Animal Services and the 911 are 24/7 organizations, and especially with River Bluff, we need to, it's not one time that it has to be plowed. It might have to be plowed several times in a night because of liability of keeping that lot clean. Now, I'm sure, 911 and Animal Services, they could, probably get through that. But the River Bluff is the one where we're having the problem with, and I believe that we've acknowledged I think we discussed that avenue, but I was told that it was a 24/7, and there's a lot of elderly people going in and out of that place, me being one of them, and that's why we're looking at this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Thank you, Mr. Fellers. Mrs. Gorel.
Thank you, Chairman. You also have to remember this services the detention home too. So, that's part of our campus, is
That's
the
true,
detention
yeah.
home. So it does that. The thing is too, if you've had some, if you go out for bid on snow plowing, I've seen what they do when they go to plow. They're not generous with our parking lots. So, you have to also look at how much damage would be done to our parking lots. And we have cars out there and everything else. This, if you go and want to buy a new one, 60 grand sounds good. But this is not. It's going to be a used one, and we're going to try and get the best we can for our dollar. Thank you.
Thank you. Ann, on a follow-up?
We actually do, thank you, Chairman. We actually do have a contract for snow plowing, but they don't even touch our property until there's a minimum of 4 inches on the ground. So at River Bluff, that is not going to help when an ambulance has to come in or whatever. In a juvenile detention, when, the police are bringing someone out, we have to be able to function 7 days a week. And it just wouldn't be cost prohibitive, because also the companies that plow, they do not want to be committed to only be on site at one location, because they have a lot of different lots. So I really don't think it would be worthwhile. And then this truck will be also what is used by the supervisor out there. This will be his personal truck to be on call and doing what he needs. And it is going to be a brand-new truck. We were looking at used, but the good news is $30,500, and the list value on this thing is $41,000. So I'm very happy that we're getting a new truck with a four-wheel drive, a backup camera, everything that we need to plow properly.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you for the questions. Any other follow-ups? Seeing none, all those in favor, and again, we're dealing with the truck purchase not to exceed $39,000. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's animal stories. We've had 778 calls, 125 in Rockford, 44 in Winnebago County, 34 in Loves Park, Rockton 10, Roscoe 18, South Beloit 16, Durand 5, and Cherry Valley 7. I found an interesting statistic, reference carcass pickups. We've had 30 carcass pickups in Rockford, 16 in the whole other county. Intake, we have 164 dogs, 231 cats, 8 domestic birds, 5 domestic rabbits, 2 guinea pigs, 2 rats, 1 ferret, and 1 alligator. Mr. Hoffman, I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. We've adopted out 57 dogs. Get this, 133 cats, 8 birds, 3 rabbits, 2 guinea pigs, 2 rats, and a ferret. We have 9 dogs to the rescues, 49 cats to the rescues, 2 birds to the rescues, and the alligator, Mr. Hoffman, was found in McChesney Park. I don't know where it was living in McChesney Park. I can show you a picture of the alligator, but we have a rescue where the alligator's at. And yes, it was big enough to bite you. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. We got a couple quick items. Public Works Committee, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no report.
Public Safety Committee, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. No report.
2 quick action items, announcements and communications. Clerk Gumma.
Mr. Chairman, the items listed below were received as correspondence.
Okay, I'll ask for the floor real quick. We got one more action item.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, we'll go ahead and place those on file. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you. May I just request that we take the raffle report out of the consent agenda, so I may abstain from voting on it.
Sure. So we have the consent agenda. We're going to vote separately. First, may I please have a motion on the raffle report alone? We'll pull that out, and we'll just have a motion on the raffle report. May I have a second on the raffle report? Second by Mr. Girl, Mr. Boomer, Mr. Butita. The raffle report is now before the board. I believe we're going to have an abstention by Mr. Fellers on that item alone. All those in favor of approving the raffle report signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And we have Mr. Fellers abstaining. Motion passes. Next, for the consent agenda, we have the approval of the September 26 meeting and the layover of October 10th, as well as the bills. May I have a motion to approve those three items? Mr. Gurl, and a second by Mr. Hoffman. Items now before the board. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Fellers, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you very much. Have a good night.